What was the diet of the millions of slaves brought to the Americas back in the days of the transatlantic slave trade? Well, they were given water-like vegetable soups that lacked essential nutrients. The plantation owners did not want to spend much on slaves' diets, even if they knew the crops depended upon slaves. That's when the African slave men and women decided to cook for themselves. Even though they were in a strange land, thousands of miles away from their home, they knew their culture, including the culinary delights. They began preparing dishes which not only fulfilled their nutrition demands, but helped them feel at home. But what are the dishes plantation slaves ate by cooking for themselves that are today not only part of history, but modern cuisine? Welcome to a new episode of Black Afric Diary, a channel where we talk about Black African history, culture, arts, and civilization. It's a place where you will see the real picture of Black Africa, its stories, and the events defining it. In this episode, we will tell you about dishes and cuisine African slaves prepared during slavery, which the African American community eats to this day. Let's get started. Back in the days of slavery, food was used as a weapon to control slaves by the slave owners. Frederick Douglass gives a detailed account of the hunger he endured as an enslaved person. For Douglass, hunger wasn't just an occasional discomfort. It was a constant, oppressive force that shaped his childhood. He describes fighting with the family dog, Old Nep, for scraps that fell from the table, competing with animals for even the smallest crumbs. He writes that he would follow the housemaid to snatch the bones and crumbs she tossed out for the cats. Enslaved children were often treated like animals, reduced to scrounging for food in a way that stripped them of their humanity. In his memoir, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, Douglass recalls the typical food given to enslaved people. Cornmeal boiled into mush was their primary staple, served in a communal trough, much like food for livestock. The children were forced to scramble for their share, using whatever they could find, oyster shells, bits of wood, or even their bare hands. The strongest children ate the most, while the weaker ones were left hungry. This image of children fighting over mush-like animals serves as a stark reminder of how food was used to strip away their dignity and reinforce their status as property. The food provided to adults wasn't much better. Monthly rations of third-rate cornmeal, pickled pork, and often tainted herrings offered little in terms of nutrition, yet enslaved people were expected to perform grueling physical labor on this meager diet. These poor-quality rations kept them in a state of constant hunger and malnourishment, weakening their bodies and ensuring that they remained dependent on their enslavers for survival. Furthermore, slaveholders used food as a reward to create a sense of hierarchy among the enslaved, encouraging loyalty and complicity among the house slaves. By elevating some over others, they reinforced a system of control that made unity and resistance among the enslaved more difficult, all while further deepening the divide between those who were given privileges and those who were left to suffer. Douglass recounts a particularly manipulative tactic used by slaveholders to control the enslaved during the Christmas holiday. For a brief period, the enslaved were encouraged to indulge in food, whiskey, and gluttony, in what seemed like a rare taste of freedom. Slaveholders even bet on who could drink the most whiskey, encouraging excessive drinking and reckless behavior. This manipulation was designed to equate freedom with dissipation. After days of drinking and revelry, many enslaved people would return to their labor, feeling sick and disillusioned, reinforcing the false idea that freedom itself was dangerous. Douglass recognized this tactic for what it was, as an attempt to make them associate freedom with chaos and indulgence, rather than self-determination. By the end of the holiday, the enslaved often felt as though returning to the fields was preferable to the excesses they had been led to believe represented freedom. Despite the overwhelming hardship, food became a powerful form of resistance and cultural preservation for the enslaved. African culinary traditions, brought to the Americas during the transatlantic slave trade, were kept alive in the ways they grew, prepared, and shared food. Dishes like greens cooked with pork, okra stews, and cornbread not only sustained the body, but helped maintain a sense of identity and connection to their heritage. Cooking, even with the most meager ingredients, allowed enslaved people to assert some control over their lives, no matter how small. Growing their own food, fishing, and hunting weren't just acts of survival, they were acts of quiet defiance. By continuing to prepare food in the ways they had learned from their ancestors, the enslaved preserved their cultural identity, even in the face of a system designed to erase it. The resourcefulness of enslaved people went beyond just growing vegetables. They adapted to using parts of animals that were discarded by plantation owners, such as pig intestines, feet, ears, and tails. Intestines, for example, were turned into chitterlings, or chitlins, a dish that became a staple of what is now known as soul food. Preparing these dishes required significant cleaning and long cooking times, but enslaved cooks seasoned them with available herbs and spices to make them flavorful. This creativity is still seen today, as chitterlings and other such dishes remain a beloved part of Southern cuisine, especially in African American communities. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black Africa. Let's continue now. Other discarded cuts of meat, such as ham hocks and pig feet, were similarly repurposed. Ham hocks, a tough and fatty part of the pig's leg, were often used to flavor soups, stews, and greens. Slow cooking these cuts made them tender, and the rich, smoky flavor became a hallmark of Southern cooking. Pig feet, like ham hocks, required long cooking times, but enslaved people found ways to make these tough cuts edible, turning them into dishes that are still enjoyed today. Tripe, the edible lining of a cow's stomach, was another discarded part that enslaved cooks transformed into stews and soups, a dish that continues to be popular in various cuisines around the world. Oxtails, which were once considered undesirable due to their high-fat content and bony structure, were also commonly given to enslaved people, which they cooked into the tastiest dishes. With time and ingenuity, they became the base of hearty stews that were both flavorful and nutritious. These dishes, like oxtail stew, are now central to soul food cuisine. Organ meats such as liver, kidneys, and heart were also part of the enslaved diet. While these cuts were less desirable to the plantation owners, enslaved people found ways to make them into flavorful meals. For example, liver and onions became a popular dish that remains part of African American culinary traditions today. Even there are dishes which people enjoy and don't know have roots in slavery. Fried chicken is perhaps the most famous soul food dish. Its crispy golden skin and juicy meat have made it a favorite for gatherings, especially on Sundays and holidays. Enslaved people mastered the art of frying chicken, using spices like garlic, paprika, and cayenne to add layers of flavor. Collard greens are a staple of soul food, slow-cooked with smoked meats like ham hocks, turkey, or bacon to bring out their deep, savory flavor. Seasoned with garlic, onions, and red pepper flakes, these greens are simmered until tender, resulting in a flavorful and nourishing dish. The broth left behind, called pot liquor, is often soaked up with cornbread, creating a hearty, comforting meal. Collard greens, with their rich, earthy taste, have long been a symbol of survival and resilience. Macaroni and cheese is a soul food classic, especially when baked to perfection. Slaves would make it creamier and richer than other kinds, thanks to layers of cheese like cheddar, mozzarella, and sometimes Velveeta. A golden, crispy topping of breadcrumbs or melted cheese added texture, while the creamy pasta beneath provided comfort in every bite. Then there was cornbread, a beloved soul food often served with greens or stews. Made with cornmeal, milk, eggs, and sometimes sugar, cornbread has a crumbly texture with crispy edges, especially when baked in a cast-iron skillet. Another dish was Hop and John, a dish of black-eyed peas and rice, which has African roots and is a staple in soul food cuisine. The peas are cooked with smoked meats like ham hocks or bacon, along with onions, garlic, and spices like thyme and cayenne. The result is a hearty, flavorful dish that's traditionally eaten on New Year's Day for good luck. The tender peas, smoky meat, and soft rice combine to create a satisfying and nutritious meal. Then there is sweet potato pie, which is the soul food equivalent of pumpkin pie, but with its own unique flair. Made from mashed sweet potatoes, sugar, spices like cinnamon and nutmeg, and a buttery crust, the pie is sweet, rich, and smooth. Cooking soul food was a labor of love, with dishes simmering for hours to allow the flavors to develop. Even the simplest ingredients, like cornmeal or collard greens, were elevated through careful preparation and seasoning, creating meals that were both comforting and deeply satisfying. That's why today, each bite of soul food tells a story of survival, ingenuity, and cultural pride. The true beauty of soul food lies in its ability to transform humble ingredients into something deeply flavorful and meaningful. It's food that nourishes not just the body, but the soul, connecting families, friends, and communities through generations. Black enslaved cooks like Chef Hercules, George Washington's chef, and Emmanuel Jones used their culinary skills to transition out of enslavement into a successful career. They cooked food the slaves were eating for their masters, which they loved, and the soul food was officially made part of American cuisine. But it's also the story of countless unnamed cooks across the South, whose lives and legacies have been lost to history. Uncovering the histories of enslaved cooks can be difficult, as many left few records of their own. Their stories often appear only in passing, buried in the accounts of the people who enslaved them. Archaeological evidence, the remnants of the rooms where they once lived, the heavy cast iron pots they carried, and the gardens they planted help to piece together their experiences. Historical documents, such as plantation records, cookbooks, and letters written by slaveholders, also offer glimpses into their lives. At first, plantation cooks were indentured servants, but by the late 1600s, enslaved African laborers took on these roles. Black cooks, bound to the fire 24 hours a day, lived in kitchens, often sleeping in lofts above the hearth in the winter or outside in the summer. These cooks were responsible for baking bread, making soups, and creating elaborate feasts for the plantation owners and their guests. They also had to be ready to serve food at any hour, whether it was 2:30 a.m. or in the middle of the day. Enslaved cooks were always under the watchful eyes of white families, with little time for rest or privacy. Yet these cooks wielded great power, as the meals they prepared were central to the reputation of their enslavers. Visitors to these grand plantations often talked about the food, unaware that the enslaved were the true masterminds behind the famous Southern hospitality and culinary traditions. Though the plantation owners may have designed the menus or provided recipes, it was the enslaved cooks who brought these meals to life. Culinary giants like Hercules, George Washington's chef, and James Hemings, Thomas Jefferson's cook, were formally trained and became the nation's first celebrity chefs. Hercules learned his craft from Samuel Francis, a renowned New York tavern keeper, while Hemings studied French-style cooking in Paris. These men, and many others whose names have been lost, blended European, African, and Native American ingredients and techniques to create a unique culinary tradition that would come to define Southern food. Enslaved cooks introduced ingredients like hot peppers, peanuts, okra, and greens to Southern cuisine, incorporating flavors from their African homelands. Dishes such as gumbo, an adaptation of a traditional West African stew, and jambalaya, a cousin of jollof rice, became staples in American kitchens. These dishes traveled with enslaved Africans, blending with European and Native American foodways to create a cuisine that reflected the multicultural reality of life in the South. Handwritten receipt books from the 18th and 19th centuries, compiled by plantation mistresses, document the evolution of Southern cuisine. Early books featured primarily European dishes, but by the 1800s, African-inspired dishes like pepper pot, okra stew, gumbo, and jambalaya began to appear. Isn't it true that soul food has some of the tastiest dishes that bring back the history of resilience whenever you taste it? What do you think about the African slaves who tried connecting with their homes by preparing food their parents and families cooked? In the comment section right below, share your thoughts on what more dishes have roots in slavery. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring videos on Black Africa, its history, rich arts and culture, and things the world should know about. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.